So I was driving to church earlier this week and had one of those encounters that left me wishing I had more information, left me wondering. And I've actually been kind of wondering all week about it. We live on the west side of Littleton. I can never do my directions in the sanctuary. We live on the west side of Littleton, so every day I drive C470 to Broadway, coming to and from church. Anyone who drives the highway to and from work on a daily basis has probably shared similar experiences to this, maybe quite often. Tuesday morning, I'm driving in around 7:30 in the morning. Stop and go traffic, especially through the construction areas now, which are all over C470. And a car was coming up behind that I decided was going quicker than he should be going. And moving from lane to lane, you know, the cars, and I know I've done this at times, so I have to admit that, but the cars that are trying to get ahead, and so you go from lane to lane, trying to jump in front of the next one, and getting a little animated. I could tell he was in a hurry. He was cutting off drivers. He was using exaggerated hand motions, some of which I won't share here. I couldn't hear him, but I could tell he was yelling. He was worked up. He was wanting to get wherever he was going, and he was going to get there as fast as he could. So here's my confession moment. There are times like this one when I find myself wanting to play with other drivers. Not in a good way. The guy was all over the place, so I found myself looking to see if I could close the distance between myself and the car in front of me so he couldn't get in front of me, or where I was in relation to the car next to me so he couldn't try to go around. Might not have been the best response to him, but I went there. And then he actually passed, and I saw his face. And I'll be honest, I had assumed that his face would be irritated and cranky and grumpy and just kind of that guy. And then I would feel better about playing with him and not being very nice. And that's not what his face showed. His face looked panicky, concerned, worried, emotional. And I started wondering if something else was going on. If there was more to it than I could know, if my assumptions about his motivations were all wrong. There was something more serious. Something that if I actually understood what was going on, maybe I would have backed off and given him room rather than trying to cut him off. So then, as I do, I started to think, or as James tells me, overthink, all of the things that could have been happening in his life. I came up with scenarios. Was a loved one in the hospital that he was rushing to? Was he late for a work meeting that was really important, could make or break a job or a situation? Was he rushing to the airport to go meet someone? Was his wife in labor? I was coming up with all kinds of things. I don't know. Of course, I don't know. I have no clue what this guy's motivation was, why he was driving the way he was. Maybe he was just cranky and being a jerk, or maybe there was something more. I'll never know. But I realized in that moment, I had to admit that his motivation wasn't really the issue. My motivation on how to respond to him had become the issue in the moment. Why was I willing to make room for him only after I considered the possibility that something might be wrong? Why did I start with an assumption that he was just being a jerk? Why didn't I give him the benefit of the doubt? Why did it take me seeing this panicky look in his face to show some compassion? I started my Tuesday morning. And then I sit down Tuesday afternoon and start really delving into this scripture, this weird Bible story for this morning. And as often happens, I think God is at work in all sorts of ways, and I had to realize this might have been one of those God moments for me. Because today's weird Bible story involves a prophet who failed to see the bigger picture. A prophet who, because he couldn't see the bigger picture, didn't recognize the consequences for him and for others of that lack of seeing. It's a story from the book of Numbers, fourth book in the Old Testament. It's about the Hebrew people on their journey into the promised land still. And the story goes like this. So Balaam arose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the officials of Moab. Then God became angry because he went. So while he was riding on his donkey, accompanied by his 2 servants, the Lord's messenger stood in the road as his adversary. The donkey saw the Lord's messenger standing in the road with a sword drawn in his hand, so the donkey turned from the road and went into the field. Balaam struck the donkey in order to turn him back onto the road. Then the Lord's messenger stood in the narrow path between vineyards with a stone wall on each side. When the donkey saw the Lord's messenger, it leaned against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall. So Balaam continued to beat it. The Lord's messenger persisted and crossed over and stood in a narrow space where it wasn't possible to turn either right or left. The donkey saw the Lord's messenger and lay down underneath. Balaam became angry and beat the donkey with the rod. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've beaten me 3 times?" Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you've tormented me. If I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you now." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey, on whom you've often ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" Balaam said, "No." Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and Balaam saw the Lord's messenger standing in the road with his sword drawn in his hand. Then he bowed low and worshipped. The Lord's messenger said to Balaam, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I've come out here as an adversary because you took the road recklessly in front of me. The donkey saw me, turned away from me these 3 times. If it hadn't turned away from me, I would just now have killed you and let it live." Balaam said to the Lord's messenger, "I've sinned because I didn't know you were standing against me in the road. Now, if you think it's wrong, I'll go back." The Lord's messenger said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but don't say anything. Say only that which I tell you." So Balaam went with Balak's officials. It's kind of a weird story. Here's a little history on Balaam, though. He was a non-Israelite prophet. He wasn't part of the Hebrew people. He wasn't an Israelite. He was of a different religion, of a different culture. He was a prophet who was known to sell his skills of prophecy and divination to the highest bidder. He was a seer, an oracle, a prophet. And in the story, Moses and the Hebrew people were close to reaching the promised land. And if you've read the story, then you know as they reach the promised land, it's a violent kind of thing. They go in and take over the land when they reach new lands along the way. And as they've journeyed to the promised land, they've already killed 2 kings from other cultures and taken over land. And so King Balak, his land, Moab, is close by. And King Balak knows that the Israelites have already destroyed other lands and people and kings, and so Balak is a little worried. He's kind of afraid. He knows they're coming. He wants to stop them. So he has a plan. He's going to hire Balaam, who's this prophet, this seer, and he's going to ask Balaam to curse the Israelite armies and stop their movement into the promised land. So he sends officials to Balaam. And what's also weird about this story is God goes to Balaam. God doesn't often go to non-Israelite people. God doesn't often go beyond his community, God's community, and reach out. So it's an odd interaction between God and Balaam for God to reach out in the first place. And even weirder that Balaam follows God's commands. Balaam believes in this Hebrew God even though he's not Hebrew. So the officials come to Balaam. God tells Balaam, don't go with them. He doesn't go with them. The officials come back to Balaam. God says, go this time. And Balaam gets on his donkey to go. It's only after God commands Balaam to go that Balaam gets on the donkey and leaves. But then the very next verse says God is angry that Balaam went. We don't know why. God tells Balaam to go. Balaam goes. God gets angry. Sends a messenger of God as an adversary to block Balaam's path that only the donkey can see. This prophet, who's supposed to see things that others can't see the messenger, and yet the donkey can. Only the donkey can. It's a weird story even up to this point. God tells Balaam to go. God gets mad at Balaam, sends a messenger to hurt Balaam. The donkey figures it out, tries to save Balaam. Balaam doesn't understand, beats the donkey. Then it gets really weird. Donkey turns around and starts talking to Balaam. I would assume that the next verse would convey Balaam's shock, surprise, bewilderment that this donkey is talking to him, but none of that is part of the story. Instead, Balaam just talks back and they have this conversation as if it's completely normal for a donkey to be talking to you. If I were a Bible literalist, this passage would cause me some tension. The donkey talking is one issue, but the lack of response by Balaam is a whole other issue. And this is where I think the biblical writers have fun. They have humor, they have creativity, they have imagination, and it really comes into play in this story. Because if you want to get the reader's attention, if you want people to sit up and start to listen when maybe they had tuned out before now, throw in a talking donkey. Throw in something that isn't supposed to happen. Throw in something that seems unimaginable, unbelievable, preposterous, and people begin to pay attention. And that's the talking donkey in our story. He's a sign, a signal that we're supposed to pay attention, that there's something going on here. There's something more than meets the eye. I don't think the story is really about the talking donkey. It's not kind of where we put our focus. But the donkey has a lot of wisdom to share. The donkey is the major character. She's the one able to see God's messenger in the road, not this famed prophet. Her actions move the story along. Her actions save Balaam's life. And she's the one who speaks truth that others can't understand. It's not just any ordinary donkey. Balaam, who's supposed to be the main guy, couldn't see the messenger of God, couldn't see the danger in front of him, didn't have the full picture, didn't know what was going on. And in his limited understanding, he chose anger and violence as his response. I'm going to venture to guess that we've all had a donkey in our life at one point or another. We've all had that time where we failed to grasp the big picture, when we couldn't see God in our midst, we couldn't see the danger in our path, a time when we didn't know what was right in front of us, but somebody else could see it for us. Somebody else could see what we were missing. Somebody even maybe tried to guide us or redirect us or stop us or warn us or help us. Have you ever found yourself in Balaam's shoes? When your own lack of seeing, lack of comprehending the big picture led to actions or decisions or attitudes or judgments or assumptions that you would have done totally different if you'd understood the full picture. Situations where we miss the messages and the messengers. First time, second time, third time, and sometimes it takes that talking donkey to get our attention. I was trying to come up with an equivalent to a talking donkey in today's world. But I think a talking donkey would get our attention just as much as anything else. It's still that shock and awe. Balaam behaved badly. He failed to grasp the big picture, and his donkey suffered. He failed to see God right in front of him. And the more I read the scripture over and over, the more I thought, I think this is one of those stories that we actually live out regularly at a smaller scale all the time. How often do we fail to see God at work? How often do we fail to see God right in front of us, to recognize that somebody else understands something we don't, and yet we don't trust? We don't trust them to guide us. This weird story is a great story because I think it's an everyday challenge to us. A challenge not to be like Balaam, not to assume that we see and know the whole picture, not to fail to trust others. Don't be like Balaam and treat others badly because we made an assumption and acted as if that was the truth. Don't be like Balaam and miss the messenger right in front of you. How often is this a part of our everyday lives? There's a story that a friend of mine told me years ago that has stuck with me because I realized as soon as I heard it, I could have told it. This could be my story. And it's a mom and a dad and a 2-year-old kid who go to a restaurant like any other ordinary eating dinner at the restaurant, mom and dad and 2-year-old sitting at the table. And as many 2-year-olds do, they can catch the attention of others and others can catch their attention. Have you ever sat at the restaurant with your 2-year-old and they're paying attention to someone else completely? It's one of those situations where the 2-year-old is paying attention to this stranger at the counter, sitting alone, nobody on either side of him, and the stranger notices the 2-year-old. And they begin to interact across this crowded restaurant. And the 2-year-old starts smiling, and mom and dad can tell that he's interacting with someone. And so like parents do, you look around to see who has your child's attention. And at first, they're kind of smiling, and they think this is fun. And then they see who their child is interacting with. And the smiles fade a little bit. Because this gentleman sitting at the counter has dirty, worn-out, ragged clothes. His hair is greasy, his face is worn with wrinkles and dirt and sun and who knows what else. It's clear he hadn't showered in probably weeks. The couple wasn't close enough to smell him, but they imagined that he smelled about like he looked, especially since nobody would sit next to him. So the parents try to redirect their child's attention, refocus them, try to get the kid to stop interacting with this stranger at the counter. But nothing they do works. The 2-year-old is just zoned in to this guy. Food comes, and the interaction between the 2-year-old and this gentleman kind of ups a little bit. The gentleman starts playing peekaboo with their kid from across the restaurant. And the kid is laughing, and he's giggling, and he's squealing, and he's having a great time. And the parents' discomfort and angst is just building. And soon, most of the restaurant is watching. And they're just watching these two, and the parents' angst is building. Their uncomfort is building. And the parents kind of waited a little bit longer than they might have, hoping that this gentleman would leave, and he clearly wasn't going to leave, and the parents needed to leave, so dad got up, mom picked up the boy, 2-year-old boy, and the parents kind of positioned themselves in between their son and this gentleman at the counter, and they try to just kind of make their way out of the restaurant. And just as they're walking by, the 2-year-old boy basically leaps out of mom's arms into the hands of this dirty, smelly stranger at the counter. Mom and dad almost have that first instinct to grab him. They can't grab him fast enough, and then they watch. And the baby just curls into the gentleman and puts his head on the gentleman's shoulder and hugs him, and they just embrace. These total strangers, 2-year-old boy, homeless gentleman, embrace. Parents kind of stand there, take a deep breath, watch it play out. Gentleman hands the 2-year-old back, tears running down his face, and simply says thank you. And then says to the parents, take care of this boy. He's something special. Mom and dad can barely talk at this point. Mom just kind of chokes out, we will. And they walk out of the restaurant. Buckle the 2-year-old into the car, get in the front seat, just sit there. And they both start crying. And they realized that their 2-year-old could see something they couldn't see. Their 2-year-old boy could recognize something special about this gentleman that all they could see was judgment and assumption and fear and discomfort. Their 2-year-old recognized God in the moment when they had totally missed it. The messengers of God who remind us to open our eyes in new ways. I could have been the mom in that story just as much as my friend was. They almost missed it. And yet it was now one of the most powerful moments of their lives. How do we open our eyes to see God right in front of us? Copeland wrote this next piece that we're going to hear. It's an original piece by him. And as he plays, I invite us to pause and reflect on the question, what do I need to shift in order to see more fully, recognize God working in my life, so that I won't miss it? Amen.